Many people believe that once the Pilgrims of Plymouth got through the first harsh winter, that was the end of the food shortages and the struggles of the colonies. And you would be wrong to believe that. It was only the beginning. The first Thanksgiving that was celebrated was in 1621 was a feast of the harvest that they had all gathered that year, but compared to the previous year, which had been nothing of course, this had been a bounty that would seem like a cause for a feast. As many of us know, and I would like to say all of us should know, but have you seen some of those Justin Awad videos of him asking people here in America basic U.S. history and geography questions, and they don't know anything?
Do you know how many states are in the USA? Around how many? Yes. You know who fought in the Mexican-American War?
Yeah. Who? No.
Give me your best guess. Who against who?
Okay, wait, what was that Mexican War?
Mexican-American War.
Who?
Give me your two best guesses.
Yeesh, it's awful. Anyway, as many of us should know, the Pilgrims made it through that first harsh winter of 1620 through 1621, and during that time they lost 50% of their people. Even in the springtime, when they began planting crops, the first governor of Plymouth, John Carver, died, and the people elected William Bradford as governor. And he would continue to win and hold the governor's seat until the day of his death in 1657. After that first long and hard winter, the Wampanoag Indians were led to the Pilgrims by Samoset. Samoset led another Indian by the name of Squanto to them, and it just so happened that Squanto was able to speak fluent English and translated between the Indians and the new settlers. Now, you may not like what I'm about to say, but too bad. It is believed that Squanto was seized with some of the Indians by one of John Smith's men, Thomas Hunt. He had taken them to Malaga, Spain to be sold into slavery. Again, the largely godless society of Jamestown rearing its ugly head. Squanto escaped to England and joined the Newfoundland Company and returned home in 1619 to find that his people had been wiped out by a disease. I find it fascinating that he likely escaped certain death from the disease, endured possible mistreatment, and was made to be sold into slavery only to escape, to learn English during his time in England, return home 2 years later to use the language of a people who tried to enslave him and to save the people who he quite frankly had no idea how they were going to treat him. It's as though God had prepared him for this moment to help the fledgling colony survive. He served as the translator for Plymouth for the rest of his life and became a resident of the newly formed colony. Thanks to him and the kindness of the Indians, they were able to teach the colonists how to survive, and they were able to have a decent enough bounty to celebrate a feast with the Indians that would be known as Thanksgiving. Here's an excerpt from William Bradford's journal about the first Thanksgiving. They began now to gather in the small harvest they had, and to fill up their houses and dwellings against winter, being all well recovered in health and strength, and had all things in good plenty. For as some were thus employed in affairs abroad, others were exercising in fishing, about cod and bass and other fish, of which they took good store, of which every family had their portion. All the summer there was no want, and now began to come in store of fowl, as winter approached, of which this place did abound, when they came first, but afterward deceased by degrees. And besides waterfowl, there was great store of wild turkeys, of which they took many, besides venison, etc. Besides, they had about a peck of meal a week to a person, or now since harvest Indian corn to that proportion, which made many afterward write so largely of their plenty here to their friends in England, which were not feigned but true reports. And yes, for all you turkey haters out there, this actually makes turkey a historically accurate meal for Thanksgiving. And for all the weirdos out there, there is not a shred of evidence that links any of these particular pilgrims to white supremacy or racism against the Indians during the first Thanksgiving. In fact, through Squanto and William Bradford, the people made a pact between each other to treat each other right, and that pact would be unviolated for the next 50 years. You remember that debt and the contract that we talked about in the last two videos about the Virginia Company? Well, that is going to rear its ugly head once again and become a problem for the new settlers. It was now the year 1622, and the Pilgrims ran into another problem. laziness, and lack of motivation for planting crops. You see, the Pilgrims had entered into a contract with the Virginia Company, and that was to have a common storehouse where everyone would gather everything they had produced to live off of and to repay their debt to the Virginia Company. From the houses that were built to the land that was cleared, it would all belong to the Virginia Company. There was no private property, there was no incentive to work for yourself, and there was no incentive to work for your family. A rhetorical question I pose: what would you do if there was a common storehouse where everyone was able to deposit what they gathered, hunted, or produced? Well, what many of them did was rely on the few who were willing to work, and in 1622, it produced food shortages and laziness. People were dependent upon others to produce food for them since it all went into the common storehouse. This problem was so bad that William Bradford wrote about it in his journal. The experience that was had in the common course and condition tried sundry years, that by taking away property and bringing community in a commonwealth would make them happy and flourishing, as if they were wiser than God. For this community was found to breed much confusion and discontent, and retard much employment that would have been to their benefit and comfort. For the young men that should spend their time and strength to work for other men's wives and children without any recompense, that was thought injustice. Bradford knew that the system of socialism was not going to work. How could anybody be expected to do their best on behalf of others if there was no benefit to themselves in the labor? Rush Limbaugh said it best. So what did Bradford's community try next? They unharnessed the power of good old free enterprise by invoking the power of the undergirding capitalistic principle of private property. Every family was assigned its own plot of land to work and permitted to market its own crops and products. And what was the result? This had very good success, wrote Bradford, for it made all hands to be industrious, so as much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been. After this, the Pilgrims had more food than they could eat themselves, and set up trading posts with the Indians. After this, Plymouth began to gain popularity, and new settlers began to move in, and the original settlers began to trade with the ship's crew so they could sell their product in Europe as well. All this would not have happened had Bradford kept the old socialism system that was imposed upon them from the Virginia Company. Now, if there was ever a lesson to learn from the Pilgrims, it would be this: socialism does not work. It has never worked. It will not work to the degree of all the socialist sycophants out there, what they're propagating anyway. It stagnated progress in the colonies and is stagnating our economy today. Well, Pablo, how do you know that it just hasn't been perfected yet? No. It will never be perfected. It will never work. The redistribution of wealth only hurts everyone. It takes away the producer's drive to make things efficient and prosperous. What would be the point if all you had to do was rely on others for your food, clothing, and shelter? It happened in Plymouth, where it was producing lazy and entitled people, and it's happening now, where all these government programs are still producing lazy and entitled people. There are plenty of people who have the ability to work, but they don't want to because of all the government programs that they have access to. Where is their incentive to produce if everything is going to be taken care of for them? And of course, the labor is just going to fall to good people who care about making a better life for their families. All the while, work gets harder. You have to work more hours just to make a living, to scrape you and your family by because we're getting murdered at the registers, because the government doesn't know how to spend your hard-earned money. They endlessly print money and inflate the dollar and make life harder for us. And then they take your hard-earned tax dollars and endlessly supply all these government programs where it is essentially socialism light for the lazy and for those to take advantage of the system. Notice, I'm not talking about those people who are really down and out and who really need help, but for those people who are perpetually on these programs, that is the problem. And what does the government want at the end of all of this? More of your hard-earned income to supply these programs with more money. You cannot tax your way out of a problem. The government has already proven themselves to be completely inept at handling our money, and they want even more? And don't even get me started on all those other foreign aid programs. The point is that socialism does not work, and Bradford knew that. People took advantage of the system back then, just like people take advantage of this system now. If there was ever a lesson to be learned, it would be this. Capitalism is not perfect, but it is a far better alternative to socialism, despite what all the hippie social science professors say. and all the brain-dead college graduates who have been brainwashed into believing the drivel of socialism and are now even buying into communism. Socialism took away the incentive to work. It took away the drive to work because there was no point in producing anything because you wouldn't be able to better yourself or your family. And that is something that we must learn. Through capitalism, it promotes that rugged individualism that we are desperately missing today. It promotes more of the innovation and more ideas for people to be able to try something new and to be able to make a better life for themselves so they could produce more and have a better life for their family. But you let me know what you think down in the comments below. And if you disagree with me, that's okay. Hopefully, one day you'll figure out that I'm right and that you're just going to catch up to me. Anyway, I'll catch you guys in the next video. On the next episode of PMS, Jamestown, tobacco, and the first slaves.